2 centuries ago, humanity was thought to be extinct. Now, they're back armed with secrets, a plan, and the power to turn the tide in a war the galaxy never saw coming. Will the Confederation survive? Or will humanity's long game be their ultimate weapon? Introduction and War Council meeting. The story begins with a meeting of the most powerful military leaders in the Galactic Confederation, held by Grand Admiral Zorax. Zorax is a large, blue-skinned being with 4 eyes, and he is facing a dire situation. The Vraxian fleet is attacking, and they are already winning. They have destroyed several outposts and killed billions of people, and now they are getting closer to the heart of the Confederation. The War Council room is filled with nervous energy. As Zorax explains the situation to his fellow leaders, he tells them that the Vraxians are not just moving through space, but are completely destroying everything in their path. Some of the leaders are angry and upset. For example, Commander Peller, who is a fish-like creature, gets frustrated and sarcastically points out that the Vraxians aren't just advancing, but obliterating everything in their way. This situation is much worse than anyone expected. Grand Admiral Zorax tries to keep calm and explains that their current weapons aren't strong enough to fight the Vraxians. Despite all the efforts, their fleet's weapons barely do any damage to the Vraxian ships. Some members of the council suggest that they need to come up with a new plan. They cannot continue to use the same methods that are clearly failing. General CS, a large, furry being with a mechanical arm, insists that the Confederation needs a new strategy. Otherwise, the Vraxians will soon reach their main planets and destroy them all. As the meeting goes on, the council becomes more desperate. There's a lot of arguing, and many people suggest different ideas, but nothing seems good enough. Every plan they try fails because the Vraxians have a way to counter their attacks. It seems like the Vraxians are always one step ahead. There is an overwhelming sense of fear in the room. If the Confederation cannot find a way to stop the Vraxians, their entire civilization could fall. Zorax and his council know that they are running out of time. The Vraxians are advancing quickly, and the Confederation is losing this battle. With every passing day, the Vraxians are getting closer to their central planets, where the most important people and resources are located. The future of the Confederation looks grim, and everyone in the council knows that something has to change quickly. But how can they fight back when their current weapons and strategies are useless against the Vraxian fleet? Mysterious arrival at the height of the council meeting. Tensions are running high, and the leaders are desperate for answers. Something unexpected happens. The doors open, and a human named Alex Reeves walks into the room. The sight of a human in the council chamber shocks everyone. The room falls silent. Humans were believed to have been completely wiped out 2 centuries ago during a war known as the Great Purge. As the council members stare at him in disbelief, Alex casually introduces himself, shrugging off their surprise. He doesn't seem worried at all. Instead of showing fear, he shows confidence. Even jokes about his sudden appearance and the fact that they believed his species was extinct. His casual tone only adds to the confusion. How can a human be here? They were supposed to have been eliminated. Grand Admiral Zorax is the first to react, still not believing what he's seeing. He questions Alex about how he survived and why he is here now. Alex explains that reports of human extinction were greatly exaggerated. He reveals that humans have been hiding, rebuilding, and evolving in secret, away from the galactic eye. For 200 years, humanity has been preparing in silence. And now they are ready to step forward. The council is stunned. They cannot believe that Alex is telling the truth. How could humanity have survived after the Purge? According to the historical records, Earth was destroyed, and every human colony was wiped out. Yet here is Alex, looking like a normal person, unaffected by the passage of time. His presence is a huge shock to everyone in the room. As Alex explains further, he does not sound like someone who is afraid or worried. He speaks as if this is just a casual conversation. His nonchalant attitude is in stark contrast to the tense atmosphere in the room. He casually tells them that humans are very resourceful and that their species has been hiding in the far reaches of space. It's constantly evolving and adapting. Alex's unexpected arrival and his boldness make the council members question everything they thought they knew about the human race. The humans offer after shocking everyone with his survival story. Alex offers the council something that could change the tide of the war. He explains that the Vraxians are using human technology, or at least versions of it, which is why they have been so successful in countering the Confederation's efforts. Alex claims that after the Great Purge, a few surviving humans scattered across the galaxy. Over the years, they adapted, rebuilt, and eventually encountered the Vraxians. At first, the humans didn't see the Vraxians as a threat. They were just another alien species in need of allies, so they traded technology with the Vraxians. But, as Alex explains, the Vraxians didn't use the technology in good faith. Instead, they turned it against the Confederation. They modified human technologies like shields and drives to become powerful weapons that are now helping them conquer the galaxy. This revelation hits the Council hard. How could they not have known that the Vraxians were using their technology? The Council is angry, but Alex doesn't apologize. Instead, he points out that humans were just trying to survive after being nearly destroyed by the Confederation. The Vraxians, however, are using this technology to gain an edge in the war, and now humanity is ready to fight back. Alex offers his help, but he doesn't want to ally with the Confederation. Instead, he says, think of it as pest control rather than an alliance. The Vraxians are a threat, and humanity knows how to deal with them. Alex offers to teach the Confederation how to use their own technology against the Vraxians. He offers them knowledge, but not an alliance. He says that he is only doing this to stop the Vraxians from taking over the entire galaxy. His offer is met with suspicion and disbelief, but Alex doesn't back down. He insists that humans want nothing more than to be acknowledged as a species. They want recognition from the galactic community, something they've been denied for 200 years. Alex makes it clear that he wants to be acknowledged as a legitimate species, not just a tool to be used by the Confederation. The Council members are hesitant. They are unsure whether they can trust a human, especially one who claims to have been hiding for so long. But they also know that they are running out of options. If Alex's claims are true, his knowledge could help them turn the tide in the war. The Council is faced with a tough decision: trust the human and his knowledge, or continue with their current strategies that are clearly failing. Strategic revelation * Alex's explanation leads the Council to a shocking realization. The Vraxians are using human technology against them. Humans, despite their apparent extinction, have been building and evolving in secret for years. They didn't just survive, they adapted and improved. Alex is offering the Confederation a chance to use that technology to fight the Vraxians. Alex describes how, after the Great Purge, humans scattered across the galaxy. They rebuilt in secret, far away from the watchful eyes of the Confederation. About 70 years ago, a Vraxian scout ship encountered a human outpost. Instead of attacking, the Vraxians offered to trade technology for resources. At the time, humans didn't see the Vraxians as a threat. But over the years, the Vraxians began to use this technology to build powerful weapons. It's eventually turning against humanity's former allies. Now, the Vraxians have been using human tech to counter every move the Confederation makes. Alex explains that the Vraxians have adapted human technology, turning defensive systems like shields and drives into offensive weapons. The Vraxians are winning the war because they are using what humans developed and modified it to their advantage. 4. The first time the Confederation leaders realize why the Vraxians have been so effective, it's not just because of their advanced technology. It's because they are using human technology that the Confederation never fully understood or had access to. The Council members are in shock as they process this new information Alex offers. His knowledge to the Confederation, but he also makes it clear that humanity wants recognition. They want to be acknowledged as a sovereign species with the same rights as the other races in the galaxy. The Confederation, however, isn't ready. To give them that recognition, they have no choice but to accept Alex's help, even if they still don't fully trust him. The first battle plan after Alex Reeves presented his startling revelation about the Vraxians using human technology against the Confederation. The Council members were left with no choice but to listen. Alex's knowledge and insight into the Vraxian fleet and their technological weaknesses could be the key to turning the tide of the war. But the question remained, could the Confederation trust him enough to follow his advice? Alex was confident, but the Council still had doubts. His human origins and the Confederation's long history of animosity toward humanity made it hard to trust him. Still, the war was getting worse, and they knew they had to try something different. Alex didn't waste any time. Immediately proposed a new strategy that involved targeting a key Vraxian ship, the Dominion, currently positioned at Proxima Centauri. The Dominion was the Vraxian flagship and the heart of their fleet. If they could take down the Dominion, it would throw the entire Vraxian fleet into chaos. This was Alex's plan, a high-risk, high-reward operation that could shift the balance of power. Zorax, the Grand Admiral of the Confederation, hesitated. His instincts told him that Alex's plan could work, but it was unlike anything the Confederation had ever attempted before. It required not only new strategies, but also modifications to their current weapon systems, which had been failing against the Vraxians. The Vraxian fleet had been adapting to every one of their attacks, and the Confederation was losing battle after battle. But this plan was different, and the Council members had to decide whether they were willing to risk everything on a human's advice. Alex didn't back down. He assured them that the key to taking down the Dominion lay in the way the Vraxian shields worked. Their shields were adaptive, which meant they adjusted to every energy attack they faced. This made it nearly impossible for the Confederation to get through. However, Alex explained that there was a small flaw in the system. The Vraxian shields had a very brief refresh cycle, a delay between recalibrations. If they could hit the shields with two completely different types of attacks in a very precise way, it could cause a cascade failure in the shields. This would make the Vraxian flagship vulnerable for a brief moment, allowing them to attack with full force. The Council members, still skeptical but desperate for a solution, agreed to follow Alex's advice. The operation would involve using multiple types of weapons in quick succession, each recalibrating at the right moment to ensure that the Vraxian shields couldn't adjust in time. Alex, despite being a human, was now considered their best chance for success. His knowledge of the Vraxian technology and his confidence in the plan gave the Council a glimmer of hope. But they still knew that failure could mean the complete destruction of the Confederation. In the hours leading up to the battle, the Confederation fleet worked quickly to modify their weapon systems according to Alex's specifications. The engineers were wary, but followed his instructions carefully. Alex's plan was risky. The modifications would require them to recalibrate their weapon systems during the battle, and if they made one wrong move, the entire operation could fail. The Vraxians were known for their ruthless efficiency. If they figured out what the Confederation was planning, they would be ready to destroy them. As the strike force prepared for battle, tensions were high. Led by Zorax, were ready to put Alex's plan into action. The operation was set to begin in 2 hours, and everyone aboard knew that the outcome would determine the future of the Confederation. If they succeeded, they might have a fighting chance against the Vraxians. But if they failed, it would be the end of the Confederation, and humanity's involvement in the Galactic War would be over before it truly began. As the Indomitable made its way toward Proxima Centauri, the crew was on high alert, Alex continued, to oversee the weapon modifications, ensuring everything was going according to plan. The bridge crew, who had initially been suspicious of him, now trusted him. They could see that his technical knowledge was unlike anything they had ever encountered, but they also knew that the battle ahead would test their resolve. Would the Vraxians be caught off guard, or would they adapt to Alex's strategy and wipe out the Confederation once again? In the quiet moments before the battle, Zorax turned to Alex. The human had been a key player in their survival. But Zorax couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Alex's involvement than just the desire to help. The Vraxians had wiped out humanity, and now Alex was offering them a way to win, but at what cost? Zorax didn't have time to think about that now. All that mattered was the battle ahead and the fate of the Confederation. Would Alex's plan work, or would it lead them straight into a trap? As the battle began, the crew of the Indomitable held their breath. Alex's strategy was their last hope, and if it failed, there would be no going back. Preparing for battle with the decision to trust Alex's plan and follow his advice. The Confederation's fleet began its preparations for the most critical operation they had ever undertaken. The mission was clear: take down the Vraxian flagship, the Dominion, and disrupt the entire Vraxian war effort. But there was no time to waste. The Vraxians were advancing quickly, and every second counted as the Indomitable, the Confederation's strike vessels, sped toward Proxima Centauri. The mood on the bridge was tense. The crew had been working around the clock, modifying their weapons and shields to implement Alex's plan. The most challenging part of the operation was the need to recalibrate the weapon systems in real time during the battle. The Vraxians had an adaptive defense system that could shift to counter any attack, and the Confederation had to exploit a vulnerability that Alex had identified. If the fleet's weapons were not perfectly timed and recalibrated, the entire operation would fail. The engineers and weapon specialists on the Indomitable were working closely with Alex, would become an invaluable asset to the mission. Despite being human, Alex had gained their respect. His detailed understanding of the Vraxians' technology was something the Confederation had never been able to achieve. They had spent decades trying to counter the Vraxian advances, but had always fallen short. Now, with Alex's help, they had a fighting chance. Zorax, the Grand Admiral of the Confederation, stood on the bridge overseeing the operation. He knew the importance of this mission and what it meant for the future of the Confederation. Alex's presence had turned the tide, but Zorax still couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more going on. How had a human managed to survive the Great Purge and learn so much about the Vraxians? Why had Alex come forward now after all this time? The questions lingered in his mind, but there was no room for doubt or hesitation. They needed to focus on the battle ahead. The bridge crew, including tactical officers, engineers, and fleet commanders, all worked together to ensure everything was ready. They knew that any mistake would lead to catastrophic failure. The Vraxians were formidable opponents, and they had adapted to every weapon the Confederation had thrown at them. This was not just another skirmish, it was a fight for survival. While the modifications were taking place, Alex continued to monitor the situation, providing input and suggestions based on his knowledge of the Vraxian fleet. His confidence in the plan was reassuring, but there was a sense of urgency in the air. Zorax, though impressed by Alex's skill and knowledge, couldn't help but feel uneasy about the humans' involvement. After all, humans had been the target of the Confederation's wrath for centuries. The Great Purge had nearly wiped out their species, and now, here was a human working alongside them to fight their common enemy. The situation was strange, but they had no other choice. As the Indomitable neared Proxima Centauri, Zorax gathered his senior officers for a final briefing. The Vraxian fleet had positioned itself in a defensive formation around the Dominion. The flagship was a massive vessel, much larger than the Confederation had expected, and its adaptive shields had made it nearly invulnerable to their attacks. Alex's plan was their last hope: a precise, coordinated attack using multiple types of weaponry to exploit a brief window of vulnerability in the Dominion's shields. It was a risky strategy, but they had no other options. Zorax stood before the War Council, outlining the mission once more. "This will be our only chance," he said, his voice heavy with the weight of responsibility. "We will execute the attack as planned. Alex, I trust you to lead us through this. Your knowledge is our greatest weapon." Alex nodded, his face serious. "I'll get it done, Admiral. But remember, this will only work if everyone plays their part. If we fail to coordinate, if we make a single mistake, the Dominion will crush us." The council members exchanged uneasy glances. They knew the risks, but they had no choice. The fate of the Confederation, and perhaps the entire galaxy, rested on the success of this mission. Meanwhile, Alex and the engineering team finalized the adjustments to the Indomitable's weapon systems. They had one shot at this, and everything had to be perfect. There was no room for error. The Vraxians had adapted to their attacks every time before, but this time, they would hit them with something they hadn't expected: two completely different weapon types launched in rapid succession. The first strike would confuse the Vraxian shields, causing them to recalibrate and make them vulnerable to the second strike. But the third strike was the key. With precise timing, they would hit the Dominion at the exact moment it was most vulnerable. The battle plans were set, the crew was ready. Zorax gave the order to proceed, and the Indomitable moved into position, the massive Vraxian fleet looming ahead. Every officer on the ship knew what was at stake. The time for planning and preparation was over. It was time to fight. As the battle began, Zorax and the rest of the crew watched the view screen in silence. The Vraxian fleet remained still for a moment, unaware of the deadly attack that was about to be unleashed upon them. The Indomitable would make the first move, and Alex was prepared to lead them through the fight. The moment of truth had arrived. Confrontation with the Vraxian fleet, the Indomitable's engines roared as it emerged from hyperspace, snapping back into normal space just a few seconds before the massive Vraxian fleet appeared on the view screen. The cold silence on the bridge was almost unbearable as the crew stared at the overwhelming sight before them. The Vraxians had gathered a formidable force around the Dominion, their flagship, and they had formed a nearly impenetrable defensive sphere with 27 warships protecting their flagship. The Dominion itself was a massive, twisted structure of metal and energy, much larger than the Confederation had anticipated. Its defensive capabilities were beyond anything they had previously encountered, and it had clearly been upgraded with technology that the Confederation had no way of countering, at least not until now. Zorax, the Grand Admiral of the Confederation, stood silently at the command chair, his four eyes scanning the enemy fleet. His mind was racing as he realized the full scale of the Vraxian threat. The battle was not just a fight for survival, it was a desperate last stand against an enemy that had already destroyed countless Confederation colonies. If the Confederation lost this battle, the Vraxians would continue their advance, and the entire galaxy could fall under their control. Alex, the human who had provided them with the knowledge they needed to fight back, stood beside Zorax, his eyes fixed on the view screen. The calm and calculated expression on his face gave no hint of the gravity of the situation. He had been integral in devising the strategy for this battle, using his deep understanding of the Vraxians' technology to guide the Confederation's efforts. Alex had already shown that he could outthink their enemies, but now it was time to prove that the plan would work in a live combat situation. I'm impressed. Alex, Zorax muttered, still staring at the enemy fleet. You were right. The Vraxians have adapted more than we thought. This is going to be more difficult than we imagined. Lex smirked, his voice light despite the dire circumstances. It's not the size of the fleet that matters, Zorax. It's how we hit them. You've got to hit them where it hurts, and I know exactly where that is. The Dominion and its fleet were the most formidable adversaries the Confederation had ever faced. Their adaptive shields had made them nearly invulnerable to conventional weapons, and they had already destroyed entire colonies with their advanced firepower. But Alex's plan had one crucial advantage. He knew the weaknesses of the technology the Vraxians were using. The Confederation had failed to exploit those weaknesses before, but now, with Alex's expertise, they had a fighting chance. The tension in the command center was palpable as the crew prepared for the engagement. Tactical Officer Jane, whose crystalline exoskeleton shimmered in the dim light, was the first to break the silence. We need to move quickly, she said, her voice sharp. The Vraxians will be expecting us to attack, and if we don't act fast enough, they'll be ready for us. Time's up, Alex said, stepping forward with determination. Let's do this. With Zorax's signal, the attack began. The Confederation ships moved into position, taking their places around the Indomitable for the planned coordinated strike. The Vraxian fleet remained in its defensive formation, but there was something different about their movements now, something that Alex had predicted. They were expecting the usual tactics from the Confederation, and they were ready to counter them. What they didn't know was that the Confederation was about to use a completely different approach, one that the Vraxians had never encountered. Alex's voice rang out across the bridge, giving precise instructions to the crew. initiating the first volley. Let's see how they react. The Confederation ships fired their weapons in a perfectly timed sequence, launching quantum torpedoes at the Dominion's shields. At first, it seemed like the attack had no effect. The Vraxian shields absorbed the energy from the torpedoes as expected, but this was all part of Alex's plan. The first volley had one purpose: to trick the Vraxians into recalibrating their shields to defend against quantum weapons. The second attack would be different, using a completely different weapon type. Second volley ready. Alex called out, his fingers flying across the console. Firing. The Confederation ships launched a barrage of plasma cannons, an ancient weapon that had been rendered ineffective against the Vraxian shields in previous battles. But this time, something remarkable happened. The plasma blasts punched through, the Vraxian defenses striking the Dominion's hull directly. The Vraxians had no time to adapt to the sudden shift in attack, and the shields were overwhelmed by the unexpected energy signatures. A cheer erupted across the bridge as the attack scored a direct hit, but Alex wasn't finished yet. Third volley is the key, he reminded everyone. This is where we either win or lose. As the Dominion tried to adapt to the previous attacks, Alex made one final adjustment to the weapon systems. This time, the Confederation launched a third volley, using a combination of energy signatures that would exploit the weakness in the Vraxian shields. The Indomitable fired a beam that seemed to bend and twist through space, striking the Dominion from multiple angles at once. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a flicker of light appeared in the center of the Vraxian flagship, rapidly expanding in concentric rings. "What's happening?" Zorax demanded, his voice filled with awe and concerned. Alex, watching intently, gave a satisfied smile. "It's working. Their shields are collapsing." Within seconds, the Dominion began to fold in on itself as the cascading quantum field collapse took effect. The Vraxian flagship, once a symbol of their dominance, was now falling apart. Secondary explosions erupted across its surface as systems failed catastrophically, and the remaining Vraxian warships scattered in confusion. The Confederation's strike force had succeeded, and the battle had turned in their favor. Zorax, his eyes wide with disbelief, turned to Alex. "You did it. You actually did it." Alex grinned, but there was no time for celebration. Just the beginning. "Let's get out of here before we become the next target." The Indomitable immediately reversed its course, moving away from the disintegrating Dominion as quickly as possible. The remaining Vraxian ships, disorganized and panicked, launched a futile counterattack. But it was too late. The Vraxian flagship had been destroyed, and their entire fleet was thrown into chaos. The Confederation had won a decisive victory. But Zorax couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more going on beneath the surface. The Vraxians had adapted to every strategy the Confederation had tried, but Alex's plan had worked flawlessly. What had been a near-certain defeat had turned into a stunning triumph. And as the Indomitable sailed back to the Confederation's command center, Zorax knew that the future of the galaxy had just been changed forever. Victory and aftermath. Atmosphere on the bridge of the Indomitable was electric as the ship sped away from the Vraxian flagship. The Dominion, which had just been destroyed in a massive explosion, the crew was still in shock over the success of their unprecedented attack, which had thrown the Vraxian fleet into disarray. As the ship hurtled through space, the once proud Vraxian fleet, which had been on the brink of obliterating the Confederation, was now retreating in chaos. Zorax, still trying to process what had just happened, stood at the command chair, his eyes scanning the view screen as the debris of the Dominion continued to float in space. His four eyes blinked in rapid succession, reflecting the confusion and awe that had taken hold of him. The impossible had been achieved thanks to the human. Alex. The Indomitable had just dealt a crushing blow to the Vraxians, and for the first time in years, the Confederation had a chance at winning the war. On the bridge, the crew was abuzz. With excitement, though, there was a quiet undertone of disbelief. Tactical Officer Jane, whose crystal-like exoskeleton shimmered in the dim light of the bridge, was the first to speak after the initial silence. "I can't believe it. We actually did it. The Vraxian flagship is gone and their entire fleet is in retreat." Zorax nodded slowly, his mind still racing with thoughts. Yes, but we must be cautious. The Vraxians are not a race to be underestimated. They may be retreating now, but they will adapt. And we must be ready for whatever comes next. Alex, who had been standing near the tactical console, was quiet, his expression unreadable as he watched the view screen. He wasn't celebrating, unlike the rest of the crew. Zorax noticed that Alex seemed troubled despite the victory. The human wasn't the type to get lost in the moment. And this concerned Zorax. After everything that had happened, Alex should have been reveling in the victory. But instead, he seemed focused, his eyes scanning the chaos of the Vraxian fleet with something more than just military strategy in mind. "Something's wrong, isn't it, Alex?" Zorax asked, approaching the human who had now become an unexpected ally. Alex turned to look at him, his expression cold and serious. The Vraxians were too easy to beat. They shouldn't have fallen apart so quickly. "There's something we're missing." Zorax felt a chill run down his spine. He had expected Alex to be jubilant, but the human's tone, serious and calculating, made him pause. "What do you mean?" Zorax pressed, his voice lowering. Alex's eyes narrowed as he stared at the retreating Vraxian fleet. Either the Vraxians weren't as advanced as we thought, or they knew exactly what we were going to do. This wasn't just a defeat for them. Something isn't right. Zorax felt unease creep over him. Could it be true? Had they underestimated the Vraxians even more than they had before? "But we destroyed their flagship," he pointed out. "We've crippled their fleet." Alex nodded, but his gaze remained focused on the distance. "Yes, you did, but the Vraxians are a resourceful species. It's too early to celebrate. We've only won one battle. The war is far from over." Zorax couldn't argue with that. The Vraxians were dangerous, and if Alex's suspicions were right, then this victory might have been part of a much larger plan. The Confederation was still fighting for its survival, and if Alex was right, this battle might only have been a small part of the conflict to come. He turned to his crew, his voice firm. "Prepare for a full report. We must analyze every detail. If the Vraxians have something we haven't seen yet, we need to know about it before they strike again." As the ship continued its journey back to the Confederation's command center, Zorax couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into another trap. The victory over the Dominion had been a significant blow to the Vraxians, but it had also raised a new set of questions. If the Vraxians were truly as advanced as they had appeared, then why did they crumble so easily? Lax's words echoed. In Zorax's mind, there was more to this story than just a military victory. The Vraxians weren't done yet, and neither were the humans. When the Indomitable arrived at Confederation Command, the atmosphere was very different from the previous days. There was a sense of cautious optimism, but it was tempered by uncertainty. The war was far from over, and despite the massive victory, there was no guarantee that they would win the next battle. Zorax led Alex and the crew into the War Council chamber, where they would debrief and discuss their next move. As the council members filed in, their eyes were filled with admiration and gratitude for Alex. The destruction of the Dominion had given them hope, but they were still cautious. "The implications of this victory are enormous," Zorax began, his voice carrying the weight of the moment. "We've dealt a serious blow to the Vraxians, but we cannot afford to underestimate them. They will regroup and adapt, just as they always do." Alex stood at the table, his arms folded across his chest. "The Vraxians are a step ahead of us. They have the technology, but they also have something else. They have a desire to win. It's the biggest mistake you can make, underestimating an enemy who's willing to do anything to succeed." Zorax nodded, his eyes focused on the human. "So what do we do next? We can't afford to sit back and wait." Alex's expression remained serious. "We keep the pressure on. We don't let them regroup. We keep them on the defensive. And we continue to adapt. The Vraxians are already changing their tactics, and we need to be ready." Zorax was beginning to see the wisdom in Alex's words. Vraxians had been aggressive, but the humans had shown them that there was another way to fight. The Confederation had the advantage of numbers, but it needed the humans' ingenuity to level the playing field. As the meeting came to a close, Zorax looked at Alex once more, his mind turning over everything that had happened. The destruction of the Dominion had been a major turning point in the war, but Alex's words reminded him that the fight was far from over. The Vraxians would not give up easily, and neither could the Confederation. In the end, the victory over the Dominion was a key moment in the struggle for survival. But it also marked the beginning of a new phase in the war phase, where the Confederation and the humans would have to work together to outsmart the Vraxians and secure a future for themselves. The fight for the galaxy was far from over, but for the first time in a long time, the Confederation had hope. Hidden agendas revealed as the Indomitable made its way back to Confederation command, the full weight of their victory began to set in. Alex's strategy had worked against all odds. The Vraxian flagship had been destroyed, and their fleet was in disarray. However, despite the clear victory, there was an undercurrent of unease among the Confederation leadership. Zorax, the Grand Admiral, had been forced to confront the fact that the human Alex had not only saved their fleet, but had also turned the tide of the war with his unconventional tactics. The War Council convened once again, but this time there was a difference. Gone was the skepticism that had previously surrounded Alex's involvement. Now, the council members looked at him with newfound respect, though there were still many questions lingering in their minds. They were now fully aware that the Vraxians had used human technology to bolster their forces, which was both a revelation and a potential advantage in the war effort. Zorax opened the meeting, his tone serious. The destruction of the Dominion has certainly changed the course of this war. We need to understand exactly what we are dealing with. Alex, you claim that the Vraxians used human technology to improve their fleets. If that is true, we need to understand how and why it happened. What exactly did you do to help them, and how can we prevent them from using it against us again? Alex stood up, his usual casual demeanor replaced with a more serious attitude. It's not as simple as you think, Admiral. You didn't just hand over our technology. We thought the Vraxians were just another species trying to survive like us, but they turned out to be much more dangerous. When we shared our technology with them, we had no idea they would use it to build weapons. We thought they were allies, but in the end, they betrayed us. The room fell silent as the gravity of Alex's words sank in. The Confederation had been struggling with the Vraxian threat for decades, and now they learned that the enemy they had been fighting was armed with some of the very technology the humans had developed. Zorax's mind raced as he processed the implications. They had been fighting a war, but it was a war where the enemy knew their every move, and it was a war where the humans had inadvertently armed the very species that had nearly wiped them out. Zorax finally spoke, his voice low. And now, what? You offer us this knowledge as if we can just simply use it to defeat the Vraxians? The situation is more complex than that. You want us to trust you, but we need more than just words. We need more. Proof that what you say is true. Alex didn't hesitate. I get it, Admiral. I don't expect you to trust me just because I say so. But I can show you how the Vraxians have been using our tech, and how we can turn that against them. The Vraxians have been modifying our weapons, but they haven't perfected them. Still a chance to reverse what they've done, but we need to act fast. The room buzzed with a mix of skepticism and curiosity. How could they know for certain that Alex's plan would work? Could they really trust this human who had appeared out of nowhere, claiming to have the key to defeating the Vraxians? Zorax knew that the fate of the Confederation depended on making the right decisions. And right now, that meant deciding whether to accept Alex's offer and allow the humans to play a larger role in the war. Zorax spoke again, his voice more measured now. You're suggesting that we integrate human technology and tactics into our war strategy, but there's more to this than just weapons. The Vraxians are cunning. If we're to defeat them, we need to know everything we can about their weaknesses. We can't afford any more mistakes. Alex nodded, acknowledging Zorax's point. I'm not just offering you weapons, Admiral. I'm offering you the knowledge of how to fight smarter, not harder. The Vraxians are a threat, but they're not invincible. If we work together, we can outsmart them. Commander Pellar, who had been watching the exchange closely, spoke up. What do humans want in return for this assistance? We know you don't offer your help out of the goodness of your heart. What's in it for you? Alex's eyes flickered with something that Zorax couldn't quite place. Was it determination? You want to know what we want? We want to be acknowledged. We want recognition that humans are still here, that we're a sovereign species. After everything that happened, the Purge, the destruction of Earth, we want to be treated as equals. Not as pests, not as the enemy. The room went silent once again. It was clear that Alex was no longer just a casualty of history. He wasn't some remnant of a lost race. He was a living, breathing representative of humanity, and he had a plan. His presence in the War Council had shifted the balance of power. The Vraxians had used human technology against them, and now humans were offering that same technology back in order to defeat the enemy that had once tried to annihilate them. General CS, who had been distrustful of Alex from the beginning, finally spoke. "You want us to trust you? But you've got to prove it first. If we let you in, how do we know you won't turn against us? How do we know that this isn't some elaborate trap?" Alex didn't flinch. "Trust. That's a luxury you don't have. But I'll tell you this. If we don't work together, you won't have time to regret it. The Vraxians are too strong, too smart. They're already adapting to our tactics, and if we don't do something soon, it'll be too late." Zorax looked around the room, meeting the eyes of the other commanders. They had been fighting this war for so long, and now they were faced with an unexpected Alea human. The irony wasn't lost on him. After all, it was the Confederation that had tried to wipe out the humans 2 centuries ago, and now the humans were offering their help to save the galaxy. "I will authorize your participation," Zorax said, finally breaking the silence. "But you will be under strict supervision. Your involvement will be limited, and you will only be given access to what is necessary to defeat the Vraxians. If you prove yourself, we can discuss further cooperation." Alex smiled, his eyes gleaming with a mix of triumph and calculation. "Deal." The council members began to discuss the next steps, but Zorax's thoughts were focused on Alex. This human who had once been thought extinct was now offering them a way to win the war. But Zorax couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Alex's involvement than met the eye. What was he really after? And what would happen when the war was over? Would the Confederation really accept humanity as equals? Or would this just be another chapter in the long and painful history of conflict between the two species? As the meeting ended, Zorax couldn't help but feel the weight of the decision they had just made. The Confederation had agreed to work with the humans, but this was only the beginning. What lay ahead could change the course of history, and Zorax knew that the future of the galaxy was now in the hands of the very species that had once been its greatest enemy. The long game of humanity *, the War Council session ended with Zorax's decision to accept Alex's proposal. Humans once thought extinct were now part of the Confederation's strategy to fight the Vraxians. However, Zorax remained deeply unsettled by the human, Alex, and his unsettlingly calm demeanor. There was something about Alex that made him more than just an unexpected ally. It was as if Alex had been playing a long game, one that stretched back long before this war began, as the Indomitable prepared for its mission to Proxima Centauri. Zorax couldn't help but wonder why Alex had chosen to reveal himself now. After 2 centuries of hiding, what had brought the human back into the galactic fold? And what exactly was humanity's long-term goal? Zorax had learned that humans were resilient, resourceful, and had a history of survival against impossible odds. But what Zorax hadn't realized until now was just how deeply these qualities ran, especially in a species that had once been nearly destroyed. Zorax followed Alex through the Indomitable's corridors, his mind racing with questions. He had to admit, Alex had proved himself with the success of his 3-strike strategy against the Vraxian fleet. The Dominion had been destroyed, and the Confederation had achieved a victory they hadn't thought possible. But victory wasn't enough. To quench Zorax's suspicion, he couldn't shake the feeling that the real battle was just beginning, and that humanity's involvement in this war was far more than a simple act of altruism. There was a hidden agenda, one that Alex had yet to fully reveal. As they reached the bridge, Alex went straight to the communications console. He began making quick adjustments, his fingers flying across the controls, as if he had been working with this technology for years. Zorax observed quietly, unsure of what to make of this human who seemed so familiar with their systems. Alex was no mere advisor, he was someone who had been deeply involved with the technology of both the Confederation and the Vraxians. And perhaps even more than that. Commander Zorax, Alex said suddenly, looking up from the console. "I need to talk to you about something." Zorax raised an eyebrow. "What is it, human?" Alex leaned in closer, his expression turning serious. "You asked why we didn't take revenge after the purge. The truth is, we were always there, waiting, watching, learning." Zorax's eyes narrowed as he took in Alex's words. "What do you mean by that?" Alex gave a small, almost imperceptible smile. "I mean that humans have learned to fight in ways you couldn't possibly understand. You destroyed our home, but we survived. We rebuilt. And now, we're not just fighting to survive, we're playing the long game." Zorax felt a chill run down his spine. The long game. It was a phrase that seemed simple, yet it carried an ominous weight. Humanity wasn't just here to help defeat the Vraxians. They had an agenda of their own. Zorax had always known that the Vraxians weren't the only threat in the galaxy, but he hadn't expected the Confederation's former enemies, the humans, to become the most dangerous player in the game. "I've spent 2 centuries watching and waiting," Alex continued. "And now, it's your turn to wait. The Vraxians are your immediate concern, but once they're gone, we'll have to deal with a much bigger issue: your place in the galaxy." Zorax studied Alex carefully, his mind racing. He couldn't deny the humans' strategic thinking. In their efforts to exterminate humanity, the Confederation had unwittingly set the stage for this very moment. The Confederation had underestimated humans, just as the Vraxians had. And now, humans were poised to turn the tables, using their knowledge, their technology, their patience, to reclaim their place in the galaxy. Alex's words echoed in Zorax's mind. "We've been playing the long game, Admiral, and we're not the only ones." Zorax turned his attention back to the view screen, his eyes scanning the battlefield ahead. The Vraxian fleet was still reeling from the destruction of the Dominion. But Zorax knew that the war wasn't over. The Vraxians would adapt, just as they always did. And soon the Confederation would be facing new challenges. Challenges that the humans had been preparing for all along, for the first time in years. Zorax allowed himself to consider the possibility that the Confederation wasn't the true power in the galaxy anymore. The balance of power had shifted, and humanity had emerged from the shadows as a force to be reckoned with. The question was no longer whether the Confederation could defeat the Vraxians. The question now was how the Confederation would deal with the new, powerful presence of humanity. As Alex continued to manipulate the ship's systems, Zorax realized that the true purpose of this war had never been about defeating the Vraxians. It was about survival for both the Confederation and humanity. But as Alex had so clearly pointed out, survival was just the beginning. The true battle for the future of the galaxy was about to unfold, and the Confederation had no choice but to follow humanity's lead. Zorax turned to face Alex one last time. "What happens after the Vraxians are defeated?" he asked, his voice low. Alex looked up, his expression unreadable. "We negotiate, Admiral. We'll negotiate the terms of humanity's return to galactic society as equals." Zorax's mind raced. Humanity wasn't just here to defeat the Vraxians. They were here to reclaim their place in the galaxy. And if the Confederation didn't learn to accept humanity's role, they would be the ones to pay the price. As the Indomitable sailed through space, Zorax couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding. The Confederation had fought to maintain its dominance for millennia. But now it was clear that the galaxy was no longer the Confederation's to rule. Humanity was here to stay. Their long game had only just begun. The battle against the Vraxians was just the first chapter. The true war for the future of the galaxy would be fought not on the front lines, but in the hearts and minds of those who had underestimated the power of humanity. Zorax couldn't help but wonder if the Confederation had made a grave mistake by trying to wipe out humanity 2 centuries ago. Now, that mistake would come back to haunt them. And as Zorax looked out into the endless expanse of space, he realized that the real question wasn't whether the Confederation could win the war. It was whether they could survive the aftermath of their own mistakes. The fate of the galaxy was now in humanity's hands, and Alex Reeves, the human who had once been thought extinct, was the key to the Confederation's survival or its ultimate destruction.